Interesting story. In 2016, end of 2016, we were getting investors for Techni Summit from all over the world. We flew investors from the US, from Europe, from Egypt, but we were struggling to find investors in Egypt. So we realized that we have startups and we're getting investors from outside of the country every year to look at these startups, and we don't have enough investors or very few angels to invest in early stage startups. So we said, okay, why not start an angel group? And our friends at Cairo Angels were the first people in the scene, and I met Ali Shalaani, who's one of the co-founders and CEO at the time, and I had a good chat with him to understand what is angel investing, and he told me, okay, listen, you need to read a book called Angel Investing by David S. Rose, and this will give you all you need to know. It's very comprehensive, very easy, and he gave me the link, and I downloaded the audiobook, I listened to it, and I was really impressed. So 2 years later, I was heading to New York, and I said, okay, let me drop a line to David and see if he's available to meet. And I did so, and he replied, instantly, like a couple of minutes later, and he said, when are you be in town? I told him this time, I have 30 minutes, you can pass by my office in New York. And this is how we met. And I was really glad to read his book and the other book also that's addressed for startups. And you guys, if you're investing, if you're a startup, these two books are for you. But David, thanks a lot for being here. And we look forward to having a lot of discussions with you. But I wanted to ask you the first question. How did you become an angel investor?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. As I mentioned, this is my return to Alexandria 40 years later after my honeymoon. And as to how I got started in investing, I got started because I was an entrepreneur. I am an entrepreneur. I think of myself first and foremost as an entrepreneur as opposed to an investor. And I am fortunate enough to be, in some sense, a hereditary entrepreneur. I am actually a fifth-generation entrepreneur. As far back as I can trace my family on my father's side, we were all entrepreneurs. Not everybody in the family, but in every generation, there was one person who was an entrepreneur, and I am the fifth generation in a direct line of entrepreneurs. I was, during the dot-com boom back in the 1990s, I was a finalist for the Entrepreneur of the Year Award from Ernst & Young, E&Y, in the United States. My father won it in 2002. My father is currently 93 years old. He turned 93 a couple of days ago. And he's now working on his third and fourth books. He is working on development projects in Ghana and things in the US. So I have a great role model for doing that.
That's great. That's great. But I know, when you're building things and you're starting to find out how to, get your way and, you get obsessed with your idea, what makes you like a good entrepreneur, a good catch that an investor would look at? Because people are obsessed with what they're doing and they fall in love with their ideas, and sometimes this could lead them somewhere or nowhere.
So I've been in starting companies since I was about 10 years old. I've started half a dozen companies. I've invested in probably 120 at this point. And so I've had experience on both sides of the table, as they say. And the older you get, and I am with 40 plus years in the industry at this point, have a lot of experience. You begin to see things more clearly than you do in the passion of your first entrepreneurial venture. And so the first thing that entrepreneurs need to understand is that investors do not invest in ideas. Ideas are wonderful. They are great. They are the spark that starts things going. But that's not enough for an investment. And for either an entrepreneur or an investor to be fixated on an idea, that doesn't work. It might be great, but they're not the people who are going to ultimately make it. Instead, what investors focus on is execution. Because execution is where the real money is made, and execution is what turns something from an idea into something that is a world-changing new company. And so, in reality, you can have amazing execution over an okay idea, and the company will do phenomenally. But you can have the world's greatest idea, But if you don't execute on it, it's not worth anything. So many people don't realize that Amazon wasn't the first online store. Google wasn't the first search engine. Uber wasn't the first taxi dispatch software. But what happened in each of those cases were they were really, really good at execution. And so that's why when founders first start looking for money, very often you'll see a founder who says, oh, I've got a great idea. Please give me money for my idea. And they're surprised that they don't get funding for their idea. They're sitting around waiting for somebody to give them money to make it work. In reality, the people who get funded are the entrepreneur who had an idea, at least hopefully a good idea, if not a great idea, and then went out and did something. As you said before, 90% of things are showing up. Showing up doesn't just mean showing up in person to sit at a conference. It means showing up to the work and effort of starting a company. And it turns out that if you show up and you put in that effort and you get started, everybody often says, oh, I don't have any money. How can I get started as an entrepreneur? And that's the wrong question, because it's not money that makes the entrepreneur. It's the entrepreneur who starts something that then gets funded. And I would much, much, much rather see somebody starting one little thing with whatever money they have to get your first product, your first customer out the door, and then your second and your third. And that's what the investor's money comes in to help them grow. And that's the big difference between the real entrepreneurs and what we call wantrepreneurs.
That's brilliant. And we see a lot of companies that come to us in our angel groups and to other investors with ideas, and they're quite sure their idea is going to make it, and we tell them, okay, just go to market as quick as you can and just validate this idea that you can do it with your team and you're actually solving a problem, and real problems. And this is where it becomes really interesting, because these startups are really about solving other people's problems, and you talked about that a lot in your book and in your shows. Tell us more about real problems and how challenging these problems are, and for investors to look at this specific entrepreneur that is solving this problem, and it could be interesting for you as Dave.
There's a saying in the investing business that investors don't invest in vitamins, they invest in aspirin. And you say, what does that mean? Well, vitamins help make you stronger and faster and whatever, and that's great. But you can, there are many vitamins, and you can take your vitamins or skip a day of vitamins. But if you have a headache, if you're at 3 o'clock in the morning and you have a splitting headache, you will wake up, and if you have to get dressed and go outside to a pharmacy to get aspirin to solve that pain problem, you will do it. And investors want to invest in solving the pain problem. And that's why you can have a great idea, you can make everything wonderful and better. But the question is, if you are really solving a problem that somebody has, an economic problem, and you come up with a solution, that will get the investment 9 times out of 10.
That's really great. And also one thing that is very interesting for investors who, angels who want to become angel investors, they are intrigued by the return that angels can make, like 20%, 25%. Yearly. Is that true? Can they really make that percentage? And how is that different before than today?
The answer is yes, they can. And this is one of the big differences between investors and entrepreneurs. There's something that investors have realized that entrepreneurs haven't figured out yet, or at least it takes them a while to get there. And so it turns out that the actual return from serious angel investors like us, who spend our time looking at things and looking at lots of companies and doing our due diligence and analyzing and negotiating appropriate deals and waiting for the company to have an exit, and over time, angel investor returns are in the 20 to 25% range on an annual basis, which is great. And if you ask an entrepreneur, does that sound like a fair return for an angel investor? Most entrepreneurs would tell you, yes, that sounds absolutely fair, right? If you can get 1 or 2% in the bank and 5% in the stock market and 10% in the hedge fund and 15% in private equity and 20% maybe in a venture fund, 20 to 25% for an angel investor coming in early, taking the risk sounds realistic. Okay, we're all agreed, right? But the problem that you and I both know, that the first-time entrepreneur doesn't realize is that of all of the angel investments we make, no matter how carefully we look, no matter how many we see, no matter how much diligence we make, 1 out of 10 of those investments is going to be the home run. And that 1 out of 10 means that in order for us to effectively get that 20% annual return, given the time it takes for the company to get to an exit, we have to look for every single company to be 30 times, 30x. So if we invest $100,000, you're looking for $3 million. If you're investing $1 million, you're looking for a $30 million return from that one company. And so therefore, there's a 10x difference because you're looking for us to invest in companies, you have to invest in a whole portfolio of companies because unfortunately not all startups succeed. So if the 1 out of 10 returns that amount, you have to look at every company to be able to get that amount. And that's when you, so if you say, okay, founder, I'm looking for 30 times my money, they're gonna say, that's ridiculous. But at the end of the day, we end up just making that 20-25% because it is so risky.
Very interesting, and this portfolio theory and making sure that you're investing in companies that would get those 30x is really important. But we're looking at investors that are coming to us and, you know, they're really very skeptical in investing in early stage startups or in startups in general, specifically though in those economic times and those downturns and with this uncertainty, with the devaluation of the Egyptian pound and other markets also and other currencies.
But that's actually the best time to invest. If you take a look at when many of the greatest, biggest companies in the world were started, they were started during downturns, right? A downturn, paradoxically, is actually a really good time to invest in a company because economic cycles tend to be cyclical, they tend to go up and down, and the average holding time for an angel investment in the United States is between 9 and 10 years, which is insanely long. If we actually had to calculate what our return would be over 9 to 10 years, you'd never make any money. So therefore, as angel investors, we all fool ourselves and we say, oh, we think we're going to get a return in 6 years. And so if you calculate out that 30x is based on a 6-year return, not based on the reality of a 9 or 10-year return, because then we wouldn't do it. So we all sort of fool ourselves because we want to support startups, right? But the bottom line, if you figure that it takes, call it 6 to 10 years for that company to really come up and become the unicorn, become the home run success, that means you had to start 10 years previously, right? And so therefore, since the cycles don't last 10 years at the trough, if you start now investing in these generally tough times, the company will then pick up as the world comes up and hit the boom. And so these are actually great times to invest.
So actually, this is an opportunity, and it's not a threat for investment at all, specifically in early stage and seed stage, because this is the time where startups are actually looking at real problems, new problems, and possible potential bigger exits or acquisitions for startups and money for investors.
Well, but that's what's fascinating. We were talking before about how Techne has been doubling every year in size. That's exponential growth. And what people often have a hard time challenging and understanding, but once you get it, it clicks, is that technology is growing exponentially. Technology itself is doubling every 18 months, which is, you've heard of Moore's Law probably, where the number of transistors that Intel could fit on a chip was doubling every 18 months. A guy named Ray Kurzweil wrote a great book called The Singularity is Near, which looks at that and analyzed that back over time. And it turns out that technology itself is doubling every 18 months. And so therefore, you now have extraordinary power. The power that exists in computers and networking and the internet and the entire ecosystem today is much, much, much larger than it was just a few years ago. And so therefore, when people say, what are the current hot areas in which I should invest or start a company? My response is, every area, because technology is growing so insanely, ridiculously fast that it is now making every company from every industry completely ready for upending. And so for Singularity University, which is a sort of think tank about advancing technology that I was an associate founder of, I noted that any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st. Because the ground has so totally changed with technology that the paradox of that is, right? If you say any company designed in the last century is doomed to failure, who was going to beat it? And that means a company that is started in this century, right? And so therefore that goes across all industries. So every industry now is up for grabs, and new technology and new approaches, new technologies applied by entrepreneurs, by founders who are visionary and see of how you can apply that technology to this business. Everything is open. So this is a great time to start a company, and it's a great time to invest.
Guys, as you heard it firsthand from the New York Times bestseller for angel investing and the startup checklist, Dave is with us the next 2 days. This is the best time to start your companies, the best time to invest. And check the agenda. We have a lot of things that David has volunteered to contribute to with Techni, and we're honored with your presence. Thank you so much for being with us, and looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.